They say that in every hall of Asgard, the firelight glowed not only on gold and stone, but also in the eyes of those who carried within themselves the essence of flame. For Thor, it was the flame of courage, loud and steady, blazing against every storm. For Odin, it was the ember of wisdom, glowing in silence, willing to burn away even his own eye to see more deeply into the truth of the world. But for Loki, the flame was never calm. His was the fire of the wild, restless, unpredictable, a spark that could warm in one breath and consume in the next. His story begins, not with glory or thunder, but with contradiction. Loki was born far from Asgard, in the realm of giants, among those who carried the raw strength of chaos in their veins. His father was Farbauti, whose name meant cruel striker, a giant of storm and lightning, fierce and violent. His mother was Laufey, sometimes called Nal, whose name carried the whisper of leaves, slender and fragile, bending in the wind. From the storm's violence and the leaf's frailty, from cruelty and gentleness together, Loki emerged. He was neither fully of the gods, nor fully of the giants. He was born between worlds, destined to walk the line where shadow met flame. It is said that as a child, Loki laughed more than he cried. His laughter rang through the halls of his kin, but it was never innocent. His eyes already carried the quickness of wildfire, sparking with mischief. He would vanish from sight and reappear in other forms, a fox darting through the underbrush, a bird swooping in sudden circles, a child slipping away into the mist. Even then, he did not belong to one shape or one truth. The world was fluid, and he moved with it, becoming whatever the moment allowed. But though he played, there was a loneliness in him. For among the giants he was too small, too clever, too strange. They valued strength, the crushing force of stone and storm. Loki's gifts were of another kind. His tongue was sharp, his mind quick, his will mercurial. He was not loved, nor was he truly hated. He was tolerated, and in tolerance he grew restless. One day he wandered farther than he ever had before. The myths do not say exactly how, but they whisper that Odin found him there. Some claim Odin had already seen his future in visions, and knew that the path of gods could not be walked without the trickster at his side. Others say Loki simply talked his way into Asgard, his wit so dazzling that even the All-Father was caught in it. Whatever the truth, Odin and Loki bound themselves together, swearing a brotherhood. The gods of Asgard may have murmured uneasily, but Odin knew that even chaos must sometimes be welcomed into the hall, for without it, wisdom would be incomplete. And so Loki came to Asgard. At first, he was an outsider. The Aesir laughed at his quick tongue, but they also frowned at his cunning. Frigg, the All-Mother, looked upon him with suspicion, as though she could already sense the sorrow he would one day bring. Thor distrusted him openly, calling him slippery, too clever by half. Yet Loki remained, for even if mistrusted, he was useful. His wit brought the gods treasures beyond compare. The dwarves, masters of craft, gave Asgard its most sacred gifts through Loki's dealings. Odin's spear Gungnir, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Freyr's ship Skidbladnir, Sif's golden hair. Without Loki's cunning, these wonders would never have come to the gods. And yet, for every gift he brought, there was trouble too. For Loki's schemes often cut as sharply as they rewarded. He was fire, warmth and destruction together. At night, when the feasts were ended and only embers glowed in the hearth, Loki would sit with his clever smile, speaking words that made the gods laugh, even when unease lingered in their hearts. He could soothe with a jest or sting with a jest, and no one ever knew which it would be. He was both companion and stranger, friend and foe, gift-bringer and curse. The sagas tell us that Loki's greatest gift was his shape-shifting. He could slip into the skin of any creature, any form. A salmon leaping in the river, swift and slippery. A mare, beautiful and luring, who once distracted a mighty stallion and gave birth to Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse. A fly, buzzing with persistence, who stung when least expected. A falcon, soaring high above the 9 realms. To Loki, forms were playthings, limits to be tested, masks to be worn. But these shapes were more than games. They were his answer to belonging nowhere. If he could not be holy god nor holy giant, he would be everything else. He would be many, so that he would not be only one. The gods watched, half in wonder, half in fear. For what could be trusted in one who could change at will? To understand Loki, one must understand fire. Fire is not only destruction, it is warmth, light, renewal. It cooks food, gives comfort, protects against the dark. But unchecked, it consumes forests, burns homes, and leaves only ash. Loki was fire and flesh. In his laughter there was light. In his cunning there was renewal. In his betrayal there was ruin. He could not be tamed. He could only be endured. And so his story begins, not with war, not with triumph, but with the spark of a flame that would one day blaze so brightly it would change the fate of gods and men alike. For without Loki, there would be no treasures. Without Loki, there would be no great tales. Without Loki, there would be no Ragnarök. This is Loki, son of Farbauti and Laufey, friend of Odin, enemy of Thor, trickster, shapeshifter, firebringer, mischief maker. His story is long, and it begins here, in the restless laughter of a child born between worlds, in the uneasy smile of a guest among gods, in the fire that flickers at the edge of shadow. In the golden halls of Asgard, where fires flickered upon stone walls and mead flowed like rivers, there was always one presence that could not be ignored. Loki, with his sly smile and eyes that gleamed like restless embers, was never silent, never still. His voice carried through feasts and councils alike, sharp as a blade, sweet as honey, dangerous as fire. He was not like Thor, whose strength roared like thunder, nor like Odin, whose wisdom weighed heavy as the earth. Loki was something else, light-footed, ever-shifting, a flame dancing where shadow and gold met. At first his tricks were harmless, small sparks in the vastness of Asgard's days. He would swap goblets at the feast tables, causing laughter when one god expected mead and found sour ale instead. He mimicked voices, led warriors into quarrels that ended in laughter, whispered riddles that promised treasures but led only to empty halls. The gods, weary from war and fate, found themselves amused. Mischief was at times a welcome fire, a spark to break the solemn weight of prophecy. But fire never rests. Sparks grow into flames, and Loki's heart was restless. Soon his mischief stretched beyond the walls of jest. One night, when the torches burned low and silence wrapped the halls, Loki's steps carried him to the chamber of Sif, wife of Thor. She was sleeping, her golden hair spread across her pillow like fields of wheat beneath the summer sun. Her beauty was famed, her hair the pride of her husband, a crown of light itself. And Loki, restless with thoughts of laughter, bent over her sleeping form. With a knife sharp as malice He cut her hair away. When morning came, Sif awoke and saw her glory gone. Her cries filled the halls. Thor came and saw his wife weeping, her golden locks destroyed, and rage unlike any storm shook the air. He seized Loki by the throat, swearing that no trick could save him this time. Loki's bones would be shattered unless he restored what he had taken. Loki, choking in Thor's grip, pleaded not with apology but with promise. He swore he would replace her hair, not with mere gold, but with living strands forged by dwarves finer than sunlight, hair that would grow upon her head as if it had never been lost. Thor's rage burned, but his pride for Sif forced him to relent. Loki was released, and so he went downward, far below the roots of Yggdrasil, to the forges where the dwarves shaped wonders of fire and stone. The sons of Ivaldi were the first he visited. With silver words he persuaded them to craft treasures for the gods. For Sif they wove strands of pure gold, soft as silk, that would root themselves in her head and grow like natural hair. For Odin they made a spear, Gungnir, that would never miss its mark. For Freyr they built a ship, Skidbladnir, that could carry all the gods yet fold small enough to fit in a pouch, and that always caught a fair wind. Already Loki had gifts that would mend his crime, but his tongue could not be still. Mischief demanded more. He boasted to the dwarf brothers Brokkr and Sindri that they could never equal the skill of Ivaldi's sons. They burned with pride and swore they could surpass any craft. A wager was made. If they succeeded, Loki would owe them dearly. If they failed, he would pay with his head. Into the forge they went. Sindri placed pigskin upon the fire, while Brokkr worked the bellows without pause. Loki, fearing their success, changed into a fly and bit Brokkr upon the arm. The dwarf winced, but the bellows never stopped. From the flames came Gullinbursti, a golden boar whose bristles shone with light, and who could run through air and water alike. Again Sindri placed gold upon the fire. Loki stung Brokkr's neck, drawing blood, but still he endured. From the flames came Draupnir, a golden ring that dripped 8 new rings every 9th night. A third time Sindri placed iron in the forge. Loki, desperate, bit Brokkr's eyelid, and blood blinded him. The bellows faltered for but a moment. From the fire came Mjolnir, the hammer of thunder, short in handle but greater in might than any weapon ever made. With treasures in hand, the dwarves followed Loki to Asgard. Before Odin and the gods, the gifts were presented. Sif's hair shone once more, golden and alive upon her head. Odin took Gungnir, the perfect spear. Freyr received Skidbladnir and Gullinbursti. Odin also claimed Draupnir, and to Thor was given Mjolnir, the hammer that would be his shield against the giants, the weapon that would protect Asgard until the end of days. The gods marveled at these wonders, yet their eyes returned to Loki. For it was he who had caused the sorrow, he who had nearly been broken by Thor's wrath, he who had brought the dwarves treasures through cunning and deceit. He was both poison and remedy, both the thief and the giver. Thor's fury cooled, for Mjolnir was worth even his wrath. But mistrust lingered. Loki's laughter echoed in the hall, but beneath it was unease, for the gods knew his mischief was never truly done. At feasts he mocked even Odin, daring where no one else would. His words struck like arrows, his laughter lit fires in the hall. Yet no one forgot that his jest had nearly ruined Sif, and that only his cunning had mended what his malice had broken. Thus Loki's place in Asgard was secured, not as hero, not as villain, but as both. The fire that warms and burns, the trickster whose laughter could never be silenced, the cause of treasures and the cause of sorrow. And so his mischiefs grew, each act weaving chaos deeper into the fabric of the gods' world, until laughter and grief were bound together forever. The story of Loki cannot be told without speaking of the children who carried his fire into the world. For the trickster, restless and ever-shifting, was not only a maker of chaos, but also a father. And through his blood, through his bond with the giantess Angrboda, three beings came into existence who would shape the fate of gods and men. Their names would be whispered in fear, sung in prophecy, and remembered as the shadows of Ragnarök itself. Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Helda Loki had taken many forms and many companions, but it was with Angrboda, the giantess of Jotunheim, that he created a legacy of terror. Angrboda's name meant she who brings grief, and indeed her presence was as dark as the forests of iron that covered her land. Her eyes burned with knowledge of sorrow, and her voice was like the wind that howls through frozen mountains. She was strong, fierce, unyielding, a match for Loki's fire. In her arms he found not laughter but something deeper, a bond of shadow and flame. From their union came three children, unlike any the worlds had seen. The first was a wolf, Fenrir, born not as a cub but as a beast already too great for comfort. His fur was black as the void between stars. His eyes gleamed with hunger, and his jaws seemed made to devour the sun itself. From his first breath, the air of Jotunheim trembled. Even the giants, fierce as they were, stepped back from him. For in Fenrir's gaze there was no play, no innocence, only hunger, only destiny. The second was a serpent, Jormungandr. His body was long, twisting, and scaled in patterns of green and shadow. He grew swiftly, so swiftly that the ground itself could not contain him. His coils stretched across valleys, wrapped around forests, until even Angrboda looked upon him with dread. His tongue flickered with venom, his eyes glowed with malice, and it was said he could taste the horizon with every breath. The third was Hel, neither beast nor serpent, but a daughter whose face told two stories. On one side she was beautiful, pale as moonlight, her eyes deep as still water. On the other, her skin was dark and cold, blue and black with death's touch, her flesh stretched thin, her gaze hollow. In her walked both life and decay. She was young, yet her presence carried the weight of graveyards. Even her laughter, when it came, was heavy, echoing like wind over empty tombs. Word of these children reached Asgard, carried on whispers of prophecy. Odin, who had given his eye for wisdom, saw in visions the doom they would bring. Fenrir would grow so vast that no chain could hold him. Jormungandr would encircle the world, its tail in its mouth, waiting for the day to release his venom. Hel would rule over the dead, gathering armies from those who perished without honor. Together, they would bring about the twilight of the gods. And so Odin called the council of the Aesir. The golden hall was heavy with silence as he spoke. These children are born of Loki, and though he walks among us, his seed carries ruin. We cannot allow them to grow unchecked. Thor, fierce in his anger, demanded they be slain. But Odin, cautious and wise, chose a different path. Not death, he said. Fate cannot be undone by slaughter. Instead, we shall bind them where their power can be held until the end of days. Thus the gods resolved to take Loki's children. They came first for Jormungandr. The serpent hissed, coiled, struck at them with venom. But Thor himself grasped him, and with Odin's command, they cast the serpent into the great sea that surrounds Midgard. There Jormungandr sank, deeper and deeper, until his body stretched across the waters. He grew until he encircled the world itself, his tail in his mouth, his coils pressing against every shore. From the depths he waited, and his venom seeped into the seas, poisoning their waves. Sailors whispered his name with dread, for storms and shipwrecks were said to be the flick of his coils. Next they came for Hel. She did not resist, for she already knew her place. Her half-living, half-dead face turned to Odin without fear. "I will go where you send me," she said, "for I was born to rule the forgotten." And so Odin cast her into Niflheim, the realm of mist and cold. There she built her hall, Eljudnir, vast and dark, with walls of despair and gates of corpses. From her throne, she ruled over those who died not in battle, but of age, sickness, or misfortune. They came to her in countless numbers, and she received them with neither cruelty nor kindness, but with the inevitability of death itself. Her realm was a shadow of peace and sorrow, and her name became a whisper of fear. Finally, they came for Fenrir. But the wolf was already too strong. None dared approach him save Tyr, the god of law and war, who alone fed him and calmed him. Fenrir grew daily, his body swelling with power, his jaws widening until they seemed to stretch from heaven to earth. The gods feared him, yet they also feared to kill him, for Odin's wisdom told them that his death would only hasten doom, so they sought to bind him. First they forged a chain of iron, heavy and thick. They brought it before Fenrir and asked him to prove his strength by breaking it. With a shake, with a snarl, he shattered it as though it were straw. Next they forged a chain twice as strong, made of stone and steel. They laid it before him, and again he allowed them to bind him. With a growl, with a twist of his mighty limbs, he broke it into shards. At last they went to the dwarves who lived deep beneath the earth and begged them for a binding that no strength could break. The dwarves crafted Gleipnir, a chain made not of metal but of impossibilities, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the spittle of a bird. It was smooth and soft, thin as silk, shining like moonlight. When they brought it to Fenrir, he grew suspicious. "This chain is too light," he said. "I will not be bound unless one of you places their hand in my mouth, as a pledge of trust." Only Tyr was brave enough. He laid his hand in the wolf's jaws, and so they bound Fenrir with Gleipnir. The wolf strained, twisted, roared with fury, but he could not break free. The chain held. Fenrir howled, the sound shaking the 9 realms, and in his rage he bit off Tyr's hand. From that day Tyr bore the mark of sacrifice, and Fenrir bore the hatred of the gods. Thus Loki's children were scattered. Jormungandr lay in the depths of the sea, Hel reigned in the land of the dead, and Fenrir was chained upon an island, his jaws dripping with hunger. Yet their destinies were not ended, only delayed. For prophecy whispered that when Ragnarök came, the wolf would break his bonds, the serpent would rise from the sea, and Hel would march with her dead against the living. And Loki, their father, though he laughed and mocked, carried within him a strange sorrow. For though he was a trickster, though he delighted in chaos, a part of him saw in his children the reflection of himself, outcasts, feared, bound by fate. His laughter hid a wound, for he knew that one day the fire he had sown in them would blaze across all the worlds, leaving behind ash and silence. And so the gods feasted, laughed, and pretended the danger was gone. But deep beneath the seas, Jormungandr's coils tightened. Deep in the mists of Niflheim, Hel's hall filled with the dead, and bound upon the island, Fenrir's jaws grew wider, hungrier, waiting. The mischief of Loki was no longer mere jest. It had become legacy, and the world trembled, for the children of the trickster were the children of doom. There was once no god more beloved in all the 9 realms than Balder, son of Odin and Frigg. His very presence was light, soft as dawn, gentle as spring after the long winter. Where he walked, the air seemed calmer, the sky brighter, and even the harshest heart softened in his presence. His laughter soothed warriors, his voice was music in the golden halls, and his beauty was so radiant that poets called him the Shining One, the fairest of the Aesir. But even light casts shadows, and in dreams, shadows often whisper of truths yet to come. One night, as Balder lay in his chamber, visions came upon him. He saw the world grow dark, saw fire consuming the heavens, saw himself pierced and lifeless, his body falling into silence. He awoke in fear, his brow wet with cold sweat. Though the hearth burned beside him, the chill of death clung to his skin. Balder spoke of his dreams to his mother, Frigg. Her heart, which carried the wisdom of a mother and the foresight of a queen, trembled. She knew dreams were not idle things, but warnings, and this warning, she feared, was of the end. Frigg went to Odin, and the All-Father bowed his head, for even in his wisdom he too had foreseen a threat of fate that led to his son's death. The gods gathered, heavy with sorrow, for to lose Balder would be to lose the joy of Asgard itself. So Frigg swore to act. She traveled across the 9 realms, speaking to every creature, every stone, every tree, every sickness, every beast. She asked them to swear oaths that they would never harm her son. Fire swore not to burn him, water not to drown him, iron not to pierce him, stone not to strike him. The earth itself swore to protect him. Animals bent their heads, sicknesses vanished from his path. From every corner of the worlds, oaths were given, and so it seemed Balder had become invulnerable. In Asgard, the gods, relieved of fear, began to test this strange protection. They threw stones at him. They bounced away. They struck him with swords. The blades bent. They shot arrows. They broke upon his skin. Balder stood smiling as laughter filled the halls, for every attempt to harm him turned to nothing. What was once fear became a game, a sport of the Aesir. They gathered in the great hall, casting weapons at Balder, each one failing, each one proving the invulnerability of their beloved shining god. But one among them did not laugh. Loki, ever the outsider, watched with sharp eyes. The hall roared with joy, but in his heart envy grew. For Loki was never beloved, never cherished as Balder was. He was the trickster, the troublemaker, the necessary chaos, but never the shining one. And as he watched the gods shower Balder with adoration, something cold coiled within him. He went to Frigg in disguise, an old woman with kind eyes and a weary smile. He sat at her side and spoke softly, asking of Balder's invulnerability. Frigg, weary from her endless labor of securing oaths, told him the truth. "All things have sworn not to harm him," she said. "All but one. There was a young sprig of mistletoe, too small, too harmless for me to ask. It seemed unnecessary." Loki's smile, hidden behind his disguise, grew sharper than any blade. He left, and in secret, he plucked the mistletoe from its root. With cunning hands, he fashioned from it a dart, slender but strong, small but deadly. The games in Asgard continued. The gods laughed as Balder stood in their midst, unharmed by every weapon they hurled. But Loki saw another opportunity, for there was one among them who had not joined the sport. Hoder, Balder's blind brother, who stood apart, his eyes covered by darkness. Loki approached him with gentle words. "Why do you not honor your brother as the others do? Why do you not take part in the game?" Hoder sighed. "I cannot see where he stands. I cannot aim, and so I cannot play." "Then let me help you," said Loki, pressing the dart of mistletoe into his hand. "I will guide your throw. Together we shall honor him." Trusting, blind to the trick, Hoder raised the dart and cast it where Loki directed. It flew true, swift as fate. It pierced Balder's breast, and the Shining One fell. Silence gripped Asgard. Laughter died. Weapons clattered to the floor. The invulnerable god lay upon the earth, his body still, his light extinguished. The hall that had echoed with joy now drowned in grief. Frigg screamed, her voice a storm of sorrow. Odin's one eye dimmed with a pain deeper than any he had borne. Thor stood frozen, hammer in hand, as if no strength could strike against this fate. The gods wept, for the fairest among them had fallen, and no oath, no power, no wisdom could undo it. Loki slipped away in the chaos, his heart a storm of triumph and terror. He had done what no other could. He had struck down the beloved. Yet even as he laughed in shadow, a part of him trembled, for he knew that from this act there could be no return. The body of Balder lay in the golden hall still as stone, radiant even in death. No wound marred him save the slender dart of mistletoe, and yet that was enough to silence the joy of Asgard. The gods gathered around him, their voices hushed, their hearts heavy with despair. Never before had such sorrow filled the heavens, for Balder was not only their brother and son, he was their light, their hope, the gentle warmth that softened even the coldest nights. And now he was gone. Frigg fell to her knees beside him. Her tears fell upon his still face, and her cries echoed like thunder. "Who among you," she begged, "who will ride to hell and plead for my son's return? Who will bring him back from the land of the dead?" The hall was silent until Hermod, Odin's son, stepped forth. His eyes burned with duty, his voice steady. "I will go," he said. "I will ride Sleipnir, the horse of 8 legs, swiftest of all steeds, and I will find the halls of hell. I will plead for Balder's release." Odin placed his hand upon his son's shoulder, and though sorrow weighed heavy, pride flickered in his gaze. "Go then, Hermod," he whispered. "Go with the hope of all gods upon you." But before Hermod departed, the gods prepared Balder's funeral. They carried him to the great ship Hringhorni, the largest ever built, which lay upon the shore. There they placed his body, adorned with treasures, weapons, and the tokens of love from all who mourned him. Nanna, Balder's faithful wife, came forward, her heart broken beyond repair. As she saw her beloved lying still, her spirit could bear no more. With a cry of grief, she fell dead beside him, her body laid upon the pyre to rest with her husband. Even the gods wept to see such love undone by fate. The ship was so vast that none could move it, not even the strongest among the Aesir. So they called upon Hyrrokin, a giantess, fierce and grim, who came riding upon a wolf with serpents for reins. With but a single push, she sent the ship crashing into the sea. Sparks flew, waves roared, and the vessel trembled beneath her strength. Thor, angered by her, lifted his hammer to strike, but the other gods restrained him, for this was a day not of rage, but of mourning. As the ship touched the waves, they placed Balder and Nanna within, their forms adorned with flowers, gold, and sorrow. The pyre was lit, and flames rose high, crackling in the wind. The gods stood in silence as smoke carried their beloved into the heavens. The sea glowed with fire, and even the waves seemed to weep. Horses and hounds were laid beside him, to follow him into the afterlife. Treasures of Asgard were given freely, for nothing was too great to honor the Shining One. So Balder's body burned, his light vanishing into smoke and ash, his spirit traveling the road to hell. In the silence that followed, anger grew. The gods turned their eyes upon Loki. Some had seen the glimmer of his hand in this, though none had caught him in the act. Yet suspicion clung to him like shadow. He smiled, he jested, but his laughter was hollow, his steps uneasy. He knew their wrath would find him. So Loki fled. He slipped from the golden halls, vanished into the wilderness, and took to hiding among the mountains, shifting shapes to mask his trail. Yet even he could not silence the whisper of doom that clung to his name, for Balder's death was no jest, no harmless trick. It was the beginning of sorrow too great to mend. Meanwhile Hermod rode. Sleipnir's hooves thundered across the sky, across the dark roads of the underworld, faster than wind, swifter than thought. For 9 nights he traveled, through valleys of shadow, over rivers of chill, through forests where no birds sang. At last he came to the gates of hell, vast and cold, guarded by the Maiden of Death herself. Hell sat upon her throne in the hall Eljudnir, her half-living face calm, her half-dead visage stern. The hall stretched wide, its walls built of despair, its gates of corpses, its tables set with hunger, its knives with starvation. She looked upon Hermod with eyes that saw both life and death. Hermod bowed. I come not for myself, but for my brother Balder, most beloved of gods. The 9 realms grieve his passing. Return him to us, I beg, for without him, light itself fades. Hel listened in silence. Her voice, when it came, was cold and measured. If all things in the world weep for Balder, then he may return to the land of the living, but if any refuse, he shall remain with me. So Hermod returned with her answer, and the gods sent messengers to every realm, every creature, every stone and tree and beast to weep for Balder. And all did, for all had loved him. The earth itself trembled with grief, rivers swelled with tears, mountains echoed with sorrow, all but one. There was a giantess in a cave, said to be Loki in disguise, who refused to weep. Let Hel hold what she has, she said. Why should I mourn for Balder? And so Hel's judgment was sealed. Balder would remain in the realm of the dead until the end of days. Asgard sank into despair. Odin's eye dimmed, Frigg's heart broke, Thor's rage grew silent and cold. Never again would laughter ring as it had. The death of Balder was the first shadow of Ragnarök, the wound from which all others would bleed. And Loki, though he hid, could not escape his fate, for the gods had seen enough. His tricks, once laughed at, were now curses. His fire, once amusing, had become a blaze of ruin. Balder's death was his doing, and for it his punishment would come. The hall of Asgard had never felt so heavy with silence. The golden pillars that once rang with laughter, and the warm voices of gods now stood like cold watchers over grief. Balder was gone, carried into the night upon the flames of his great ship, and with him a brightness that had once been the heart of the 9 realms had vanished. The gods walked as though their steps dragged chains, for sorrow weighed upon each one of them, and even the music of the wind through Valhalla's banners sounded like mourning songs, but grief alone did not hold sway. Among the shadows of sorrow, anger burned like a hidden coal, for while all mourned, all knew who had set this tragedy into motion. It was Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the clever tongue who had whispered poison into the ear of Hoder and placed the fatal dart of mistletoe in his hand. The gods whispered his name with bitterness, and in the corners of their minds, each replayed the moment. Baldur's fall, the light dimming, the laughter fading into cries. Loki had struck at the heart of Asgard, and though he had fled into the wild places of the world, his shadow lingered over every hall, every feast, every dream. None could rest until justice was done. Odin, high among gods, sat upon his throne with ravens perched at either side. His single eye, deep as the void between stars, saw not only what had happened, but the strands of what was to come. He knew that Loki's mischief was no longer harmless play. It had become venom, a slow poison corroding the bonds of kinship. And though Odin's heart was torn, for once he had named Loki brother, he knew what must be done. "Find him," Odin's voice carried like thunder through still air. "Find him and bind him, for his time among us has ended. The doom he has sown must be answered with chains." The gods set out in search. They scattered like hunters across the 9 realms, through forests where the moonlight lay like silver dust, across mountains where storms tangled their beards and cloaks, into caverns where the echoes themselves seemed to mock them. They searched. But Loki was cunning. He wore 1,000 forms, slipping from shadow to shadow. He was a salmon gliding in a river's current, a bird darting through the sky, an old woman bent over with age, a fox vanishing into undergrowth. At every turn he laughed, a laughter that carried on the wind, taunting those who sought him. Yet even the cleverest trickster cannot run forever. Loki's own pride betrayed him. For one night, when the stars were hidden and the rivers glowed with the reflection of a pale moon, Loki lingered too long in one form. A salmon he had become, shimmering in the water, darting past rocks and roots. He thought himself safe, swift as flowing currents, unseen beneath the rippling surface. But the gods, guided by Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength, cast their nets wide. The river foamed with their chase, the water roared with their fury. Thor, the Stormbringer, stood knee-deep in the torrent, his arms strong as mountains. He thrust his hands into the rushing waters and seized the great salmon. Loki writhed and twisted, scales flashing like fire in the moonlight, but Thor's grip was iron. He held the trickster firm, lifting him from the river. And as the salmon's body shimmered, it stretched, broke, and there was Loki once again, caught in the hands of his greatest foe. Dragged from the waters, Loki spat curses and laughter both. His eyes, sharp and mocking, flashed like embers. "So, you found me," he said, his voice slick with irony. "And what will you do now, mighty gods? Chain me? Kill me? Have you forgotten, Odin, the day you called me brother? Have you forgotten the times I brought you treasures, the gifts that arm your halls? Without me, would Thor's hammer rest in his hand? Would Odin's spear fly with fate? Would your ship sail, your ring multiply? You owe me as much as you hate me." But none answered, for his words, though sharp, could not pierce the wall of grief that Baldur's death had built around their hearts. Thor only tightened his grip. Freya's eyes turned away. Tyr clenched his fist. Frigg's face was cold as winter stone. They marched him back to Asgard, not with triumph, but with the heavy silence of a family bearing one of its own to judgment. And so Loki, once companion at feasts and fellow in battles, was dragged in chains before the assembly of gods. The firelight flickered upon his face, and though his lips twisted in mockery, there was no mistaking the shadow that clung to him. The trickster had become the betrayer, the friend who had torn apart the bond of kinship. The trial was no trial. Words were scarcely needed. All had seen. All had suffered. Even Sigyn, his faithful wife, stood with tears at the edges of her eyes, torn between love and horror. She alone did not condemn him, but neither could she shield him from what was to come. The gods resolved upon his fate, but justice in the old ways was never simple, for Loki's punishment would be woven with the fate of his children, as the sins of the father and the doom of the bloodline were bound together. Odin spoke the decree, and the word settled upon the hall like stones. Bring forth the spawn of Loki, and let the binding be made complete. And so they did. Loki's sons, Vali and Narfi, were brought forward. Fear clouded their eyes, for they knew the wrath of the gods was heavy. A cruel choice was made. Vali was transformed, turned into a wolf by the will of Odin. In madness he leapt upon his brother Narfi, tearing him apart in a frenzy of fang and claw. Loki screamed, a cry that shattered through the golden hall, half fury, half despair. The gods did not flinch, for in their eyes this was justice, cruel yet fated, the weaving of doom that none could escape. From Narfi's entrails, slick and glistening, they fashioned chains, not of iron nor of gold, but of blood and kin, bindings that no strength could break, no cunning could untangle. These they would use to tie Loki to his fate. The gods carried him far from Asgard, away from the shining halls, into a cavern deep beneath the earth. There, amid jagged rocks and dripping stone, they laid him upon 3 great slabs. His son's entrails they stretched across his body, fastening him to the cold stone. The chains burned with more than iron. They burned with betrayal, with sorrow, with the doom of his own making. Above him Skadi, the goddess of winter and vengeance, placed a serpent, hung so that its venom dripped upon his face. Each drop burned like fire. Each hiss echoed like scorn. Loki writhed, but the chains held him fast. His laughter had turned to screams, his clever words to curses that filled the cavern. Yet beside him faithful Sigyn knelt. With a bowl she caught the venom before it could fall upon him. She held it steady, her arms trembling but unyielding, her love an unbroken shield. Only when she turned to empty the bowl did the drops strike Loki's skin, and his body convulsed with agony so fierce that the earth itself shook. Men would one day call these quakes the trembling of Midgard, but in truth they were the echoes of Loki's torment, and thus he was bound, not for days, not for years, but until the end of all things, bound in chains born of his own blood, beneath the venom of the serpent, with only Sigyn's loyalty as a fragile shield. In the silence of the cavern, amid the dripping of poison and the steady rhythm of his wife's devotion, Loki lay bound. Yet even in his pain, a spark remained. In his heart, amid the venom and the sorrow, the fire of mischief still flickered. For he knew that one day, when the world drew near to its twilight, the chains would break, And when that day came, his laughter would once again rise and all the realms would tremble. Time passed in the cavern like water dripping from stone, slow, steady, eternal. Each drop of venom that Sigyn caught marked the rhythm of years, centuries, and ages. Above the earth, the seasons turned, empires rose and fell, men were born and died, forests spread and withered. Yet beneath the stone Loki lay bound, his laughter stifled, his voice echoing in darkness. The gods, having carried out their grim justice, seldom spoke of him. To some he was forgotten, a shadow left behind in the underworld of rock and venom. To others he was a wound that never fully healed, a reminder that kinship can curdle into betrayal, that laughter can sharpen into poison. For Odin, he was both, brother and foe, the companion of countless adventures and the architect of unbearable grief. And yet the story of Loki's binding was never only about vengeance. It was also about endurance, about the fragile, stubborn flame of loyalty. For Sigyn did not leave. Night and day, through centuries uncounted, she remained by her husband's side. Her arms ached, her back bent, her eyes dimmed with weariness, but she stayed. Every time she held the bowl high, every time she shielded his face from the serpent's venom, she carved her love into the stone of the world itself. Sometimes when she turned away to empty the bowl, the venom struck him full upon the skin. His scream split the silence, shaking the earth, and the mortals above felt the trembling of their fields and homes. They wondered at these quakes, never knowing that it was the agony of a god that made their walls shudder and their mountains crack. And in those moments, Sigyn wept, for she could not save him fully, only soften his torment, lessen the flood of venom that sought to burn him away. The cavern became a world of its own. The walls glistened with dampness, the serpent's hiss became a song of cruelty, the clatter of the bowl became a heartbeat, and Loki, bound to the stone, wove his thoughts like threads. He remembered Asgard's shining halls, the golden feasts, the laughter that once had included his own. He remembered the treasures he had won for the gods, the hammer, the spear, the ship, the ring. He remembered Baldur's fall, the scream that had torn the joy from the world. Regret and pride warred within him. Sometimes he thought of himself as a fool, too eager to wound, too blinded by envy. Sometimes he thought of himself as the only one who had seen clearly, who had pierced the veil of Asgard's pride. For were not the gods themselves flawed? Did they not build their order on the bones of giants? Did they not weave their laws from cruelty as well as wisdom? If he was guilty, then so were they, and his punishment was merely the mirror they feared to face. But pride and bitterness could not silence the pain. Every drop of venom burned, and every scream shook the roots of the world. Loki, the trickster, the firebringer, lay powerless. And yet even in his chains, he dreamed of freedom. In his dreams he saw Ragnarök. He saw fire devour the sky. He saw the frost giants march. He saw Fenrir breaking free from his bonds, Jormungandr rising from the sea, hell opening her gates. He saw himself, no longer bound, standing once again amid chaos, laughter spilling from his lips as flames licked the heavens. He saw Heimdall, the ever-watchful, his rival, his opposite, facing him with a sword drawn. The two fated to clash until both fell. These dreams were more than visions. They were whispers of fate, threads woven into the tapestry of the cosmos. Odin, with his all-seeing eye, knew that Loki's chains were not eternal. They were strong, yes, and cruel. But even entrails and venom cannot hold forever against the turning of destiny. The Norns had already carved it into the bark of Yggdrasil. When the twilight came, the trickster would rise. Above the cavern, the world grew restless. Men sang songs of earthquakes, of hidden gods whose rage trembled beneath their feet. Skalds whispered of Loki's binding, and though they cursed his name, they marveled at the devotion of Sigyn. For hers was a love unshaken by shame, a loyalty that no curse could dissolve. In her mortals found a tale not of betrayal but of steadfastness, a reminder that even in the shadow of doom, compassion can endure. And so the centuries folded upon one another. Loki's name became both curse and prayer, his story both warning and prophecy. Children learned of his tricks, of his lies, of his laughter that had turned to screams. They were told never to trust fire, for it can warm but also burn. They were told never to trust words too sweet, for they may hide poison beneath their honey. And yet they were told also that fire brings light, that without it there is only cold and dark. In Loki, they saw not only danger, but the restless, necessary spark of change. Meanwhile, in the cavern, Sigyn's bowl grew heavy again and again. Her arms trembled, her tears fell, her resolve wavered, but she did not abandon her husband. Perhaps she knew that one day the chains would break, that the venom would no longer drip, that fate itself would shift. Perhaps she simply could not leave, for love is not always wise, nor always just, but it is enduring. And Loki endured. His skin burned, his body twisted, his voice echoed through stone, but his mind was fire. Even as venom sought to drown it, it flared, it seethed, it schemed. He thought of vengeance, of laughter, of freedom. He thought of the day when the serpent's hiss would be drowned by the roar of Fenrir, when the trembling of his body would become the trembling of the 9 realms as they collapsed into ruin. The gods above thought him silenced, chained, defeated. But beneath the earth, bound in entrails and venom, Loki still burned. His punishment was agony, but it was also fuel. Every drop of poison, every quake, every scream was a promise. When the day came, the world would remember not the silence of his binding, but the fire of his return. And so he waited, through ages uncounted, through nights that stretched longer than eternity, he waited. Sigyn by his side, the serpent above, the chains biting into his flesh. The trickster was bound, but the tale was not ended. For even in silence, even in darkness, even in pain, Loki remained what he had always been, a spark, a fire, a whisper of chaos waiting to rise. And in the far future, when the sky cracked and the earth split, when gods and giants marched to their doom, the cavern would break open. The serpent would fall silent, the chains would snap, and Loki would stand again. His laughter would echo louder than ever, and the twilight of the world would begin. Until then, the cavern held its breath, listening to the hiss of venom, the trembling of chains, the sighs of Sigyn, and the endless patience of fate. The world had grown heavy with silence, a silence that was not peace but the waited pause before a storm. Deep beneath the mountains, where the chains of the gods had bound him with entrails hardened into iron, Loki lay. His body was stretched against the cold stone, venom dripping above him, his beloved Sigyn forever at his side, her arms weary yet unyielding as she held the bowl. Ages had passed in torment, yet within Loki's restless heart, the fire had never dimmed. It smoldered like the hidden ember beneath ash, waiting for the breath of fate to stir it into flame. It was in those shadows, between drops of venom and cries of anguish, that Loki dreamt. He dreamt of the sky cracking with fire. He dreamt of the sea splitting open and Jormungandr, his son, rising with waves higher than mountains. He dreamt of Fenrir's roar shaking the pillars of heaven. He dreamt of Hel's cold throne, her gaze unblinking as she summoned legions of the dead. And in each vision he saw himself unbound, his laughter ringing across the battlefield like the crack of burning wood. The chains that held him trembled. The entrails that had once been unbreakable were fraying, not by weakness of material, but by the inevitability of fate. The twilight of the gods had come, and no binding, no oath, no plea of mercy could halt the turning of the wheel. Above Midgard, men felt the first quakes. The ground shook with a violence unknown, and mountains split as if cleaved by invisible axes. Farmers abandoned their fields, mothers held their children, and old men whispered of the end foretold. Yet none could know that far beneath them Loki stirred. His scream when venom struck his skin had always rippled the earth. But now, as his chains cracked, the tremors were the pounding of destiny itself. Sigyn looked upon her husband with sorrow. She had endured ages of pain beside him, catching venom in her weary bowl, only to fail when her arms faltered. She had watched him convulse in agony, had listened to his laughter turn to madness and back again. She knew in her heart that the end had arrived. Her tears fell silently, not for his suffering, but for what must come once he was free. For the world above, for the gods she had once revered, for the people of Midgard. She wept. The moment came with a sound like the breaking of 1,000 spears. The chains snapped. The serpent above hissed, but in one furious thrash, Loki cast aside his torment. He rose taller than the shadows that had caged him, his eyes burning with both pain and triumph. His laughter, long silent, erupted and echoed through the caverns like thunder. "I am free," he said, his voice more flame than word. The world answered. From the east came the sound of a horn, Gjallarhorn, blown by Heimdall. Its note pierced every realm, from Asgard's shining halls to Niflheim's frozen wastes. The gods woke, warriors rose, giants stirred, and even the dead turned their ears to the sound. It was the call to the final battle, the herald of Ragnarök. From Jotunheim the frost giants marched. Their steps cracked the rivers, and their breath turned the air to storms. From Muspelheim, Surt the fire giant raised his burning sword, brighter than the sun, and led his flaming host across the broken sky. From Hel the dead obeyed their queen, marching in ranks without heartbeat, their eyes hollow yet aflame with purpose. And at their center, walking with stride of storm and shadow, was Loki. No longer the bound prisoner, no longer the jester of Asgard. He was the trickster at twilight, the fire that burned not for mischief but for ending. His hair flowed like embers in wind. His smile was carved with venom and vengeance, and his eyes glowed with the reflection of the doom he had always known was his gift to bring. The gods gathered in Asgard. Odin sat upon his throne, his ravens whispering the fates already sealed. Thor gripped Mjolnir, the hammer that had broken giants and monsters alike. Yet even his heart felt the weight of coming doom. Frey and Freya stood ready, Heimdall's horn still in his hand, Tyr with his single arm steady upon his sword, and Baldur, radiant even after death, awaited the path Hel might grant him. Yet all eyes turned toward the horizon where the armies of fire and frost approached, and with them Loki, the one they had once called brother. The clash was inevitable. The twilight had begun. The air itself seemed to burn and freeze at once as the armies of doom gathered. The horizon was a war torch, the skies reddened with the flames of Muspelheim, while black storm clouds from Jotunheim twisted into towering shapes that blotted out the stars. Lightning danced upon the waves as the Midgard serpent stirred, its massive coils breaking the seas and sending floods across the lands of men. The wolf Fenrir, unbound at last, leapt across valleys with each step, his jaws stretching so wide they threatened to swallow the very sky. Loki walked at the front, his figure both man and shadow, fire and frost. The trickster had become something greater, something darker, the conductor of chaos. Once he had amused the gods with clever words and tricks. Now he wielded those same gifts as weapons. His voice roused giants to frenzy, his laughter unsettled even the dead who marched in silence. His cunning bound these forces together, armies that had never marched as one until Loki's will united them in hatred for Asgard. Gjallarhorn's call still echoed in the heavens as Heimdall stood watch at Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. The shimmering ark trembled beneath his feet, for never before had it borne the weight of so many approaching foes. Heimdall, the ever-vigilant, saw Loki's face among the storm and flame. His eyes, once bright with watchfulness, now narrowed with recognition of fate. It would be he and Loki who would fall together. As the enemies drew near, the gods of Asgard assembled in their full splendor. Odin, clad in a cloak darker than raven's wings, rode upon Sleipnir, the eight-legged steed that galloped faster than thought. At his side strode Thor, his hammer glowing with runes that pulsed like thunderclouds ready to break. Tyr, undaunted despite the loss of his hand, raised his blade, its edge glinting in the stormlight. Thor saw him and roared, his hammer rising, but Odin's hand held him back. "Not yet, my son," Odin murmured, his one eye, dark as the abyss of fate, fixed upon Loki. "The end has an order even in chaos." Meanwhile, Fenrir lunged at the sky itself, his jaws snapping at the sun and moon. With a shuddering cry, he swallowed them whole, and the world plunged into twilight, neither day nor night, but eternal dusk. The serpent Jörmungandr writhed from the sea, its body encircling Midgard, waves crashing like mountains against the shore. Its breath poisoned the air, its eyes gleamed with death, and Hel, half beautiful, half corpse, marched at the center of her legions. She raised her hand, and the dead obeyed, their steps steady, their silence dreadful. No heartbeat guided them, only her command and the inevitability of the end. High upon Bifrost, Heimdall raised his sword, his gaze locked with Loki's, and in that instant both knew their fates. They had always been destined for each other, watcher and trickster, the one who sounded the horn and the one who brought the storm. The Rainbow Bridge shuddered as the armies pressed forward. It cracked, colors splintering like glass. Heimdall's voice rang out, steady and solemn. "Asgard shall not fall unchallenged," and he leapt into the fray. Thor saw him and roared, his hammer rising, but Odin's hand held him back. "Not yet, my son," Odin murmured, his one eye, dark as the abyss of fate, fixed upon Loki. "The end has an order even in chaos." Meanwhile, Fenrir lunged at the sky itself, his jaws snapping at the sun and moon. With a shuddering cry, he swallowed them whole, and the world plunged into twilight, neither day nor night, but eternal dusk. The serpent Jörmungandr writhed from the sea, its body encircling Midgard, waves crashing like mountains against the shore. Its breath poisoned the air, its eyes gleamed with death, and Hel, half beautiful, half corpse, marched at the center of her legions. She raised her hand, and the dead obeyed, their steps steady, their silence dreadful. No heartbeat guided them, only her command and the inevitability of the end. High upon Bifrost, Heimdall raised his sword, his gaze locked with Loki's, and in that instant both knew their fates. They had always been destined for each other, watcher and trickster, the one who sounded the horn and the one who brought the storm. The rainbow bridge shuddered as the armies pressed forward. It cracked, colors splintering like glass. Heimdall's voice rang out, steady and solemn. Asgard shall not fall unchallenged, and he leapt into the fray. The battlefield stretched wider than any mortal eye could behold, yet every inch of it burned with chaos. Fire licked the sky, frost split the ground, thunder roared, and shadows swarmed like locusts. It was not one war, but many, woven together into a tapestry of endings. Thor advanced, his every step cracking the ground, Mjolnir glowing with stormlight. Across the waves, the great serpent Jormungandr rose, its body coiling around Midgard, its head rearing high as a mountain, its fangs dripping venom thick enough to blacken seas. Thunder and serpent had always been destined for each other, two forces bound to meet only at the end. Thor lifted his hammer to the sky, and lightning obeyed, splitting the heavens open. With a roar that shook the 9 realms, he hurled himself into the sea, waves crashing as he struck Jormungandr's scales. The serpent writhed, its tail smashing into mountains, its hiss louder than 1,000 storms. Venom sprayed into the air, raining down upon the earth, burning soil and flesh alike. Yet Thor pressed on, each blow of Mjolnir cracking bone, shattering scale, echoing like drums of doom. On another field, Odin rode upon Sleipnir, his cloak whipping like night itself. Before him stood Fenrir, the wolf vast enough to eclipse the horizon. Its jaws gaped so wide they scraped the sky, and its eyes glowed with endless hunger. Odin met it with calm fury, spear Gungnir steady in his hand. "Come then," Odin whispered, though all the world seemed to hear. "Let us see if fate has left me even a moment's chance." Fenrir lunged, the earth quaking as its claws raked valleys into canyons. Odin struck with his spear, its tip shining with the runes of countless oaths. But destiny had long been sealed. The wolf's jaws closed upon him, and the All-Father vanished within darkness. A silence fell, heavy, unbearable, before breaking into the cries of gods and men alike. The death of Odin shook the world more than any thunder. Elsewhere, Frey met Surt, the fire giant whose sword was brighter than the sun. No weapon of steel could match its heat, no shield could turn its blaze. Frey, brave though he was, had given away his magical sword for love long ago. Now, with only an antlered blade, he stood against the inferno. Their clash was brief, yet fierce. Surt's fire engulfed him, and Frey fell, his sacrifice remembered in flame. Among the clamor, Loki moved. His steps carried him through fire and frost alike, untouched. He did not fight as Thor fought, with hammer and storm, nor as Odin fought with spear and wisdom. Loki fought with guile, with swiftness, with the venom of words and the sharpness of sudden steel. He cut down warriors with a smile, his laughter weaving through screams, a reminder that chaos was his only weapon and his greatest strength. Then came Heimdall. The watcher of the gods stood, sword raised, his horn at his side, his gaze locked upon Loki. The noise of battle seemed to fade between them. Trickster and sentinel, fire and silence, brother and foe. They charged. Heimdall's blade sang like light itself, precise, inevitable. Loki twisted, shifted, his form flickering into shadows, serpents, even flame. Yet Heimdall struck true again and again, driving the trickster back. Still, Loki's cunning cut deep, his blade finding the Watcher's flesh. They fought as mirrors of destiny, each strike a reflection of the other, each wound shared like a bond they could not escape. Neither could live while the other did. Their final blows came as one. Heimdall's sword pierced Loki's chest as Loki's dagger slipped into Heimdall's heart. The two fell together, the trickster's laughter mingling with the Watcher's silence. Above them, the sky burned. Surt raised his flaming sword high, and with one swing he set the world aflame. Flame swallowed forests, mountains, oceans. The very roots of Yggdrasil trembled as fire consumed all. Yet even as the end drew near, the battle of Thor and Jörmungandr reached its climax. Thor, drenched in venom, brought Mjolnir down in a final strike, shattering the serpent's skull. Jörmungandr's death cry echoed across all realms. But Thor, staggering, felt the poison burning his veins. He took only 9 steps before he too fell, collapsing into the ash of the dying world. The twilight of the gods had come. The battlefield had become unrecognizable. Where once there were plains and seas, now only fire and ash remained. The air was thick with smoke, the ground molten beneath the feet of the dying. The cries of gods, giants, and mortals alike had faded into a single dirge, the sound of a world unraveling. Surt stood at the center, his colossal frame wreathed in fire, his sword blazing brighter than the sun had ever shone. With every movement, flames leapt higher, devouring sky and stone alike. The stars themselves seemed to wither under his light, their brilliance snuffed out as though night were swallowing heaven. Yggdrasil, the great tree that held the 9 realms together, groaned in agony. Its roots shuddered, its branches quaked, its leaves fell as embers. Serpents gnawed at its roots, fire scorched its trunk, frost cracked its boughs, and the weight of death bent its crown. Yet still it endured, trembling beneath the storm of Ragnarök. Amid the ruins, Loki's body lay still beside Heimdall's. The trickster's face bore a faint smile, even in death, as if chaos itself had not ended but only changed form. His blood seeped into the earth like molten copper, vanishing into the cracks of the world. Heimdall's eyes, once ever watchful, were closed in eternal rest, his duty fulfilled in silence. The gods were gone. Odin swallowed by Fenrir, Thor fallen beside the serpent he had slain, Frey burned to ash by Surt, Tyr crushed in the jaws of Garm. One by one the great names of Asgard had perished, yet in their passing a strange hush fell over the cosmos. Not peace nor victory, but the breath before rebirth. The flames that devoured the world also purified it, burning away not only stone and sea but sorrow and pride. The seas boiled, the mountains sank, the heavens collapsed. The rainbow bridge shattered into shards of light, raining down like dying stars. All that remained was fire. Fire in the skies, fire in the seas, fire in the roots of Yggdrasil. Then slowly the fire dimmed. Ash fell like snow, covering the ruined world in a gray shroud. Silence deeper than any night stretched across the void. No cry, no horn, no laugh broke it. Only the faint creak of Yggdrasil, scarred yet standing, remained. And in that silence life waited. Seeds buried in ash, streams hidden beneath soot, hope trembling like a spark refusing to fade. Though Loki was gone, his legacy lingered. Chaos had not perished. It slept, waiting to be stirred again. For as long as there was order, chaos would rise to meet it. And as long as there was creation, destruction would follow, dancing together in endless rhythm. Thus ended the twilight of the trickster, not with his triumph, nor with his defeat, but with the certainty that his laughter, his fire, his chaos would echo forever in the heart of the cosmos. The battlefield was silent. Where once fire raged and steel clashed, now only ash remained. The smoke of Surt's sword lingered above the horizon, a fading glow like embers in a hearth that had burned too long. The gods had fallen, their halls emptied, their voices gone. The giants had returned to dust and shadow. Monsters had coiled into death, their struggles stilled at last. And yet, silence was not emptiness. For deep within the hush of a broken world, something stirred. A faint memory, a whisper that did not belong to the dead, but to the living patterns of creation itself. Loki's body lay still beside Heimdall's, their final blows having bound them together forever. But though his heart no longer beat, though his laughter no longer echoed through the 9 realms, the essence of what he was could not be buried. For chaos does not die. Chaos transforms. It is a river flowing unseen beneath the stones. It is a flame hiding in the ashes until the wind awakens it again. It is a seed buried in darkness, waiting for the rains to fall. Thus, Loki's legacy did not end with his death. It began again in every fracture of the world, in every silence that trembled with the possibility of change. When the flames of Ragnarök finally cooled, the earth was left bare, scarred, and trembling. Mountains had fallen, seas had boiled, the sky itself had cracked. Yet from the ruins, life stirred. Tender shoots broke through blackened soil. Rivers found new paths across scorched plains. The air, once thick with smoke, grew thin and clear again. It was in these fragile renewals that Loki's shadow lingered, not as malice, not as cruelty, but as the eternal reminder that endings are never endings alone. They are also beginnings, the new dawn that would one day rise, with Baldur's return, with the sons of Thor lifting Mjolnir, with the whisper of peace across Midgard, would carry within it the unseen hand of the trickster. For without his fire there could be no renewal. Without his disruptions there could be no rebirth. The survivors of Ragnarök, those few who found shelter beneath Yggdrasil's branches, would one day tell stories. Around small fires lit in a quiet world, they would whisper of the gods who once were, and of the battles they fought. They would speak of Odin's wisdom, of Thor's thunder, of Frey's sacrifice, of Baldur's light. But always there would be a pause when they spoke of Loki. For how could one capture him in words? He was both villain and helper, both destroyer and savior, both flame that burned and spark that warmed. In his laughter was cruelty, and yet in his cunning was the seed of creation. He had betrayed, and yet without his betrayals the stories of the gods would never have unfolded as they did. So the people remembered him in silence or in whispers. For even gone, Loki was dangerous, not because he might return, but because his truth never left, that life cannot be bound to one shape, one order, one certainty. It must break, shift, stumble, and rise again. In the great hush of the new world, when the stars began to shine once more over a sky washed clean, Yggdrasil stirred. The world tree had endured fire and venom, shadow and ruin. Though many branches had blackened, though many roots had bled, its heart still glowed. And within that ancient glow was the memory of all things: Odin's sacrifice, Thor's thunder, Frey's courage, Baldur's fall, and Loki's fire. For Yggdrasil remembered him as it remembered all, and in that memory, chaos remained a living current, woven into the roots of creation. Some say that in the new dawn, children born beneath the pale light of morning sometimes laughed in strange ways, as though recalling a joke older than themselves. Some say that in the crackle of new fires, in the flicker of flame upon stone, Loki's smile lingered still, and some said, though none could prove it, that whenever peace grew too heavy, whenever order weighed too much upon the world, the shadow of a trickster stirred again. Not as Loki, the man, the god, the betrayer, but as chaos itself, wearing 1,000 new faces, always reminding creation that it must never grow still. For the world breathes in cycles, life and death, order and disorder, light and shadow, and within those cycles, the spirit of Loki was eternal. So the epilogue of the trickster is not silence, it is not absence, it is not finality, it is the eternal truth that every fire, once extinguished, leaves embers, and every ember, with time, waits for breath. Thus ends the tale of Loki, and thus it never ends at all.